My name is Bill Blakemore, and I will be your moderator for the evening. So I brought my beat-up, academic-looking briefcase. I'm not an academic, though I was until I was 25. I'm a journalist. I've been working for 38 years for ABC News and also for various print outlets. And I'd like to welcome you all to Science and Faith. Faith, defined in the American Heritage Dictionary as belief that does not rest on logical proof or material evidence, from the Indo-European root, as you all know, behed, which meant to trust, to confide, or to persuade. And science, which means observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena, from the Indo-European root ske, which meant to cut, to split, to dissect, originally as with a shin bone or something else that might have some pithy marrow in it. Please notice that this is not described as science and religion, but science and faith, which may help us as we get going. An important distinction. And for that matter, just as well, because the word religion is still much debated for its origins. Religio, to tie back. Does it mean to tie you back to a group, to tie you back to a given faith? The academics are still debating that one. My goal for this evening, for all of us, at least, whatever else happens, is that by the time you leave in 90 short minutes, you will each have an understanding from the inside, in effect, of what is in the mind of each of our four wonderful panelists. If you also happen to leave this evening having gained an understanding of, and perhaps the ultimate understanding of, the meaning of existence, all the better. And if we happen to hear some ultimate blasphemies this evening, if the ground opens up and sulfurous fumes come out and we get sucked down, or other problems up in the atmosphere, don't worry, we've had the building fitted out with very good lightning rods. I myself, I've been asked to say, am also personally interested greatly in this and have been all of my life, that in the next 90 short minutes we should discover what the meaning of life is or know the reason why. I am the son, the grandson, and the great-grandson of preachers and of theologians. My father, after he got his master's in chemistry and thought he was going to become a scientist, then got his PhD in theology, and by the time he died in 1975 at the age of 62, his title was Professor of Ecumenical Christianity and Interfaith Theology. He was one of the Protestant observers at the Second Vatican Council, where science was brought for the first time in a modern way into the Catholic religion. And he did all of this at the University of Chicago, where I grew up, across the street from Stagfield, where they invented the atom bomb, or the first self-sustained chain reaction. When he died, my father did, we found that the last thing he'd published was a little article called After Death, Thoughts Thereon. And he pointed out in this little article there's only one place in the New Testament where the afterlife is talked about, when I think it's Paul says, it's a mystery and will all be changed as in the twinkling of an eye. That's all it says about the afterlife. But that, my father pointed out, what Jesus spends most of his time doing is walking around talking about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, the kingdom, which we may most recently have seen in a scientific sense, possibly, just a week ago in the New York Times in that report about one Jill Bolt Taylor, who had a stroke at the age of 39, she herself a scientist, in her left hemisphere brain, and immediately experienced bliss, liked it, at first didn't want to come back, having turned off her reasoning half of her brain, leaving the creative part going forth, and she felt she was in something like nirvana, but she eventually decided that she would come back to Earth, becoming something like what the Hindus and the Buddhists call a Bhakti Yoga, somebody who's got nirvana but wants to come back and help spread the compassion. Is this a new insight into what science can show us about religion? Was she an example of what the Judeo-Christian calls Emmanuel, translated as God with us, when a Bhakti Yoga comes back from nirvana to the earth to help spread the compassion? Who knows? Well, I've covered a bunch of wars, all of them divisible on their front lines by religious or apparently faith differences, but there's some question about that. I've covered 4 popes, including John Paul from balcony to grave, and a number of stories on the neurosciences, other psychology stories, and most recently for the last 3.5 years, the science of global warming. That happy little story, to the point that my executive producer, Andrew Morris, has taken to introducing me as our end of days correspondent. Well, there is a lot of apocalypse in the air, as some commentators have recently been saying, all kinds of end-of-days movies to go see. And so there's my 2 bits. The rest of the evening we're going to hear about these actual professionals in this field, our 4 panelists, and of course your questions. Nicole, could we have the lights up just a little bit more here in the auditorium? And there's a reason that we're turning these lights up. We want to make sure that you know that these 4 people, saying whatever they say, outrageous or not, can see you looking at them when they claim what they're going to claim, knowing that you will later be asking them tough questions about what in heaven's name do they think they're saying. I will in a moment bring these 4 guests out one by one, introducing them like heavyweight champions in the field of the, should I say in the field of the Lord, or the meaningless bottomless abyss, whichever your particular flavor may be. Though it's not a Darwinian struggle, really, is it? May the best paradigm win, but it's not really a Darwinian struggle. Nonetheless, the kinds of things that will be said here on this stage this evening are the kinds of things over which wars have been started and fought, or at least upon which wars have been blamed. But my last admonition, please, and request: no fisticuffs. If you hear outrageous things said here that give you the feeling of uncontrollable bellicosity, please step outside until it passes. All right. Now, to bring out our wonderful guests one by one, and I've asked them to come out one by one. First, I would like to introduce you, and hold your applause to the end until all 4 out if possible, Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete. Monsignor Albacete, would you please come out? He has a degree in space science and applied physics. He has a master's in sacred theology, a doctorate in sacred theology from one of the Vatican universities in Rome. He's a former president of the Catholic University of Puerto Rico, a very good personal friend of John Paul II. Did he just make a joke?
No, no. I just look like one.
I knew it would start early. It's all right. I once tried to interview him for a couple of ABC documentaries on the Pope. He stole the show. Anyway, that's not quite true. But he has also been a collaborator of Cardinal Ratzinger, who is the current Pope. He is the author of God at the Ritz, Attraction to Infinity, which is a pretty big place. One reviewer described this book as a have another double espresso marathon conversation hell, this is a papal bull session. Cardinal McCarrick wrote that Monsignor Albacete has a keen insight into the mystery of God. Cool. He has certainly tangled with what the Catholics call the mystery of suffering, the mystery of human suffering. Monsignor Albacete was born and raised a Catholic, and he still is one. So far, as he says. Next, Dr. Nina Azari, assistant professor of psychology at the University of Hawaii. Nina? She was raised a Unitarian by Unitarian parents, and as an adult she converted to Roman Catholicism, so she's now in his camp. But she says she still does Unitarianism. She has a PhD in psychology and theology. She speaks and has studied many languages, recently including Persian. She is a specialist in cognitive neuroscience and the psychology of religion, and she uses PET scans and FMRIs to examine brain activity in religious people. One big surprise when she started working in her research, expecting, as many people did, that the brain's limbic system would light up in religious people and be the center of religious activity, but no. She can talk about that to us. Her research, she says, has nothing to do with the question of whether God actually exists. We'll see if any of the panelists can take her on about that. And she says that our next panelist, Paul Bloom, the author of an article entitled "Is God an Accident?" actually does believe in certain things, and that Paul Bloom and his colleagues are just making assumptions that she doesn't happen to buy. So our next panelist, Dr. Paul Bloom, professor of psychology at Yale University, explores how children and adults understand the physical world and the social world, with a special focus on morality and religion, and on fiction and art. He publishes articles in many of the most prestigious peer-reviewed science journals, including in Nature and in Science. Also, you may have seen his byline in the New York Times, Atlantic, and other papers and magazines. In his article, Is God an Accident?, he wrote, "When I was a teenager, my rabbi believed that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was living in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, was the Messiah, and that the world was soon to end. He believed that the earth was a few thousand years old, and that the fossil record was a consequence of the Great Flood. He could describe the afterlife and was able to answer adolescent questions about the fate of Hitler's soul. My rabbi was no crackpot. He was an intelligent and amiable man, a teacher and scholar, but he held various views that struck me as strange and even disturbing." He says that currently he is an atheist, not an agnostic, which means not knowing, but an atheist. He has written, "We're evolved, all of us humans, to be creationists," and he is currently writing a book about pleasure.
I like that.
Well, science and religion have both always been interested in that subject. Science, not as much as religion very often, it seems. Finally, our last panelist, physicist William D. Phillips, Nobel laureate, a fellow of the Quantum Institute of the University of Maryland and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. He won his Nobel Prize for the development of methods to cool and trap atoms with laser light. Basically, as he says, making the coldest things anybody knows about anywhere. He likes to quote the book of Hebrews, which says, quote, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Faith is the evidence. He's the son of an Italian Catholic mother and a Welsh-American Methodist father. He was raised a Methodist, and he is still a Methodist, now a United Methodist. He's fascinated by science and has been since he was a kid, when he assembled bottles of household substances into his first chemistry set and put all manner of items under the microscope his parents gave him. He's a founding member of the International Society for Religion and Science. When asked, "Does science make belief in God obsolete?" he answers, "Absolutely not." So, a round for our four panelists. So, start with a couple of facts. A 2006 survey at Baylor University found that 92% of respondents believe in a personal God. There seems to be an inherent human drive to believe in something that transcends our everyday lives, and scientists are now asking why. Second fact, the European Commission is funding a 3-year project now called Explaining Religion. It started last September, will run 3 years. 2 million euros have been invested by the European Union, and it involves scholars from 14 universities, among them psychologists, biologists, and anthropologists. The focus of this is to search for the biological reasons why human beings believe in God or gods, and in religion in general. And this is the largest ever scientific study of the subject, as far as anyone knows. So, let's start with Dr. Bloom. Dr. Bloom, you are a North American consultant for the Explaining Religion project. You have written that this article, "Is God an Accident?" What has your research led you to think in regard to this, and what is the meaning and purpose, as far as you're concerned, of this extraordinary European project?
So we've evolved a very powerful social system for making sense of other people. And this is so powerful that to some extent it overshoots. So we become animists. We see intelligent energies even when they don't overtly exist. We are very prone to look for purpose and meaning behind things, even natural things that don't have any obvious human intervention. And these habits of the mind, which you could find in children before their first birthday, tend to make religious belief natural and appealing.
Remarkable. We'll hear more about that. I want to point out already, to keep us clear on some things, you've been using the word religion and religious belief very much in your first description here, not the word faith, which is the title here. We want to keep that distinction going here with regard to what we think we're talking about, whether it's religious belief or faith, and whether one needs the other.
Fair enough. And to be even more precise, what I'm most interested in, what people in this group are most interested in, is what you call supernatural belief. belief in entities and people and gods and ghosts and spirits that are said to be outside of the natural world.
Nina Azari, tell us quickly about your work and what it might lead you to think, if anything, about such a European project and Paul's basic position here, coming from his point of view of an atheist. And forgive me for just interrupting one thing. Quick yes or no question. Do you think being an atheist as opposed to an agnostic is a position of faith?
No.
Is your position, as a yes or no question, as an atheist, then a position, if not of faith, of evidence?
Yes.
We'll get back to that. Nina, tell us quickly about your work. We'll come back to it, I'm sure, over the next hour. And what perspective it gives you on this European project and on Paul's positions.
Okay, if we're coming back to it, then I won't give a full-blown description of the studies themselves. But in brief, the kind of work that I do and my colleagues do, it's never single-handed, is to address the question, broadly speaking, what's going on in the brain when a person does or says or reports X, Y, Z? So in the case for the topic of religion, I and my colleagues are specifically interested in religious experience, and that is identified by the people we study as a religious experience, as opposed to a faith experience or a spiritual experience or a whole host of similar descriptors we think might be similar descriptors. Okay? So we address the question, what's going on in the brain when someone reports being in a religious state? They say, I'm in a religious state. Then we take our fancy tools that we have today called PET scanning or FMRI scanning. It shows brain activity, changed brain activity patterns when someone is doing or in a particular state. Okay? And so we have reported specific kinds of brain activity patterns that are distinguished from other states that a subject will report. A subject is the person who volunteers, will find themselves or induce in themselves. Okay, so different from particular emotional states.
And if I could just ask,
yeah.
Religious state as opposed to a faith, does faith not have a state? Give us a quick pocket definition of the difference.
A definition or the contrast?
Yeah, contrast.
Okay, in our studies we've been contrasting a religious state to various emotion states. For example, we would ask somebody, please try to get yourself into a happy state. And we have a whole bunch of things that we do in the experiment to set that up. And we'll scan your brain. Now we have that picture. Please try to get yourself into a religious state. We do the brain scan, we have that picture, and we compare and contrast. Okay, so the comparison states that we are sticking with right now are emotional states. Need that be the only states we contrast? Hopefully not.
And how do you think of faith as something different from religious?
How we define a religious state, we don't. Our definition of a religious state is what the subject says it is. Because we won't know when a subject is in that state. That's our assumption with our paradigms. We let the subject, it's a partnership, we let the subject say, oh yeah, okay, I've attained a religious state. And we can get into details about this because it's tied up with who are your subjects. Okay?
Right, so we'll come back to that. But basically, then, would I be right in guessing that your work wouldn't necessarily be totally at odds with the idea of this European project, which is searching for the biological reasons why humans believe in God?
The way that our work, as I see it, intersects, or any functional imaging work, which are these fancy tools, fMRI and PET, where that intersects with a project on the order of what's going on with this European Commission. As I understand it, the mission of that project is to address a why question. Why do people believe? Why is there religion? Why is there faith? In my view, and this is a standard debate within the sciences, do sciences properly address the question of how, a description, like painting a picture, what does it look like, or do they address the question of why? The work I do, as I see it, is descriptive. What's going on in the brain? Full stop.
And we'll come back.
Not why is it going on?
But what's going on? And we'll come back to this in more detail later. But can you give us a hint as to what you found? Have you seen little pictures of God running around in the brain?
Okay, so that has a two-pronged answer. If you're begging of two-pronged answer. One is, do we see descriptors of God? That gets to the question of what are we studying? God doesn't go under the FMRI, go into an FMRI machine. God doesn't go into a PET scanner. We're studying the human being. So we've got our cameras and all of our things set and focused on a human being. That is the proper subject of study for functional neuroimaging and neuroscience. So do we see God running around? We're not even looking. I don't. Why did you ask that question? It's a stupid question. The other is, and now I forgot what your other question was because the first one was so stupid.
Okay, I'm proud of I nonetheless remain proud of the question, and we'll stick to it because I wanted to make this very clear. Or who knows what kind?
Oh, I know what it was. How does it intersect, right?
Well, basically, we're trying to get a quick description of what it is you're finding. Are you looking for which part of the brains light up during religious experience?
Okay, so then back to the question, which is very simple, it's like, what's going on in the brain? Like all 6-year-old children, what's going on in the brain? What does it look like? So we're looking for changed patterns in brain activation where your brain is using energy. We assume that part is somehow related to whatever state you're in, right? We see peaks of activation. So what we then try to do is, how are there, for example, what we found are broad areas, and we can discuss a little bit later if it's pertinent, in what we call neocortex, that's frontal part of the brain, a little bit back, and parietal, frontal and parietal cortex. There's all kinds of other parts that are deep down in the brain, but frontal and parietal, we saw there was relative greater changes in activations when people reported, our subjects, we'll talk about later, reported being in a religious state, as opposed to being at a rest state, like your brain in idle, your car in idle. So then we want to say, after some more experiments, how specific is that brain activation pattern? Does it happen also when you are feeling a political commitment? Does it happen also when you're looking at a beautiful painting? So we want to hone in on the specificity.
Great introduction. Monsignor Lorenzo.
Yes.
You appear to be religious. I do not.
I've ruined it. I am very religious.
You're very religious. You say you're very religious. I have no eyes to see into another man's soul. I don't want to presume about your religious feelings or your religious experience. But if Nina were to put an FMRI on your brain, what would she see?
Well, I want to make sure it is in Hawaii. She works over there, and I'd be glad to, if invited, I'd be glad to have as many experiences as you want. I have no idea what she'll see. It'll be interesting. I'm not, to find out how the brain works, and the brain, I suppose, is the point of entry into the self, into the person, how I react, or how I arrange the reactions of all of me with respect to the world. So to find out how it works when people are claiming to be in contact with something mysterious, transcendent, I find that very interesting. I would love to read that stuff. As to the European Commission, I agree with about 95% of everything he said. And my first thought was, I wonder if I can get a little money from them to the research. I am not a dualist. I believe nothing. Very St. Thomas Aquinas, as old as he was, nothing enters the human being, the person, except through the senses. That is to say, there are no purely spiritual or purely religious experiences. They are experiences of all that I am. So that a vision of God or an experience of God or faith in God would have a material, physical dimension in the brain or however it is thought, it's to me not at all surprising. The alternative is that there are two selves, a spiritual self and a material self. That has never been the teaching of the Catholic Church. There's only, even what we call the soul is what informs the body. That's philosophy. But it essentially means that we are both at the same time material and yet animated by desires that point to what is possible, that point beyond.
Indeed, Augustine and also Aquinas even more said, we are one substance.
Yeah.
And yet Paul Bloom, I don't know if he's acquired sainthood yet, but that may not be relevant, says no, we're all, as he just told us, essentially, somewhere deep down at least, dualists. You disagree on this?
I do, at least myself. We are dualists. Okay, let me precise it a little bit further. In terms of substances, I don't think we have to be dualists. I think we are dualists in terms of the fact that there are two narratives, two discourses needed to explain the full range of our experiences, and one is not collapsible into the other. But these, to call these the activities of an essence, of a substance, so that we are two substances, I think is wrong, it's incorrect, it's not been, well, I would say it's not been the teaching of the church, but who cares? It's not what I've experienced.
And basically, you do not believe that science, for whatever science is or may become, will explain away faith, and indeed faith like yours.
Explain away, no, but I think it certainly will contribute to my appreciation and understanding, so that something happens that, in my opinion, is absolutely necessary, which is the number one, I would say, if I dare say so, concern of the present Pope, that faith be reasonable.
Indeed, the last Pope's second to last encyclical was called Fides et Ratio,
right.
Faith and Reason, and St. Paul himself, a saint of great discerning, according to many people, wrote that all things are written for our learning. So this is your attitude.
That sure is.
Right. Well, now, Dr. Bill Phillips, you have the burden on this panel of having won the only Nobel Prize presently, and therefore of batting cleanup on this first introductory round of questions. I have 5 or 6 questions for you. For starters, I'll try to collapse them all into one and basically ask, what has been going on so far in this conversation, and how do you feel about the European effort to apply money to why people biologically believe in God?
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit shocked by some of the things that I've heard. I was really shocked by Paul saying that he doesn't believe that his atheism is a position of faith. Because I've always thought that atheism or theism were equally positions of faith. And I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, but I think we'll have to explore a little bit more about what is meant by faith, because I'm not sure I like the definition you came up with at the very beginning.
The American Heritage Dictionary.
Yeah, but just the
Blame
same.
it on somebody else.
I'll bet there were other definitions after that one.
There were indeed. I just chose one.
And, but basically it was belief not based on evidence. And I guess the way I would rather describe it is belief based not only on evidence. And I would be pretty sure that if we went there with Paul, he might modify his idea about his atheism, but maybe not, and that would be very interesting to find out. Now, the European study, one of the things that popped into my mind, perhaps somewhat mischievously, is would anybody think to do a similar study about why people believe in science? Because, after all, a lot of people have said that the very doing of science requires a certain acceptance on faith of ideas like the universe is reasonable and subject to study, not something that was always believed. And so I wonder whether, it's not like I'm saying science and religion are the same thing. On the other hand, I don't think that there is as much difference between the pursuit of science and religion, or science and faith, as people sometimes make it out to be. As a Methodist, as you've pointed out, we are taught that our faith is based on 4 pillars, the so-called Methodist quadrilateral, which is Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. So to a scientist, that's textbooks, lectures, theory, and experiment. And okay, they're not identical, but there are similar aspects to the way in which we approach science. We don't check everything that we know about science. We accept a lot of stuff on faith. Now, there's a difference. We can, in principle, do the experiment and check it out. But the fact of the matter is that if we had to do that for everything, we would never make any progress. So the way we do things on a day-to-day basis...
May I ask a question there? We would never make any progress because you're agreeing with Karl Popper and other philosophers of science that absolute proof, absolute truth are not concepts that really belong to science, but rather failure to refute? Is that the reason?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I study electromagnetism, let's say, and I read in a book all these experiments that were done, and I believe that they in fact did those experiments. I don't go and do them myself. Maybe sometimes I do, but in general, I don't do every experiment that I've heard about. Nevertheless, I believe that they were right. Now, there's a difference. I could, if I wanted to, do those experiments. So I'm not saying it's the same thing. I don't have to accept all those scientific things on faith, but I do.
You're suggesting a pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
You do and you see what can come out of that.
Yeah, and if I insisted on checking every one of them, then I would never have time to learn something new.
All right. Paul, I see you squirming in reaction to 3 or 4 things here. You've just been challenged there, and I think here, and possibly there.
I'm just going to focus on an area of agreement, which is you're exactly right, that as psychologists, we're not only interested in why people believe in supernatural things, we're interested in why they believe in natural things. My wife has spent most of her career studying why people believe 1 + 1 = 2. And she actually believes 1 + 1 does equal 2. But the fact that a 6-month-old knows it is kind of fascinating, and you want to know why. This is particularly true for the sort of thing I'm interested in. So I'm very interested in why people are creationists. But I'm also interested in why people believe in natural selection. Could people do me a favor? I want an informal poll. Could you please raise your hand if you agree with the following statement? Humans and other animals have evolved through Darwinian natural selection without any divine intervention. Okay.
Without any divine intervention.
You are very odd. No offense, because I think so too. But you are a small, weird minority of Americans. And I have written at least 3 papers trying to figure out what makes you so strange. So Okay, well,
interestingly,
still,
Nina didn't raise her hand.
That's because my hands are cold
So
and I'm
did
sitting on it.
But Lorenzo did.
I raised my hand.
And I wasn't sure whether I should raise my hand or not because I wasn't sure exactly what the question meant.
Well, let's take both of these possible. Tell us first quickly what you weren't sure about in his question in terms of its meaning.
What is meant by the without any divine intervention? Because I believe that God created the universe and provided the universe with all of the potential that it needed. I believe that evolution occurred through natural processes rather than supernatural processes, but I'm not at all sure that God does not intervene in the world through natural processes, through processes that are completely indistinguishable from things that we would scientifically assert are natural processes. See, I have no idea how God intervenes in the world, but I believe that God does intervene in the world.
Do you think about God when you're doing your science?
Well, I think about God when I do my science probably about as much as people think about God when they bag groceries at the supermarket or when they... In other words, the same way people think about God throughout anything that they do in their regular life if they are people of faith.
Why do you still believe in God? Why do you still have faith in God?
What do you mean still? As opposed to...
Well,
I mean, there's a lot. There's a tremendous amount in that still. What's behind the still that you've said?
Well, there are indeed stages of religious maturation.
Yeah.
And maturation in understanding our faith.
Right. And you think the end of that should be atheism?
I suppose that could have been implied by my question. but I'm not going to reveal my particular bias as a professional journalist here. That's an interesting point, that some people with a scientific frame of mind might presume that the more a scientist knows, the less they're going to have in terms of a sense of mystery inside, because they keep filling in the gaps.
No, I think it's just the opposite. I think it's just the opposite.
It's the very
Absolutely opposite.
Absolutely, I agree with
The
Nina.
Catholic half here is going to be heard from right now. Nina, and then Monsignor Lorenzo.
No, I think mystery is the heartbeat of science.
Yes.
I think without that, it just wouldn't be any fun. We'd all pack up our bags and leave. I mean, that's my position. I mean, if you take the mystery or the questioning and the, oh, what if? Okay, we found that out. Okay, next, what if? I mean, if that was all swiped off of the slate for science, I really, frankly, would have better things to do. I'd rather go swimming. I mean,
Is it the same mystery as the mystery that's talked about at the heart of religion and of
well,
faith?
I think that's a very interesting conceptual, issue. That is, what is the definition? What is the meaning of mystery? And I think the meaning of mystery is contextualized. The meaning of any word is. Whatever context you're standing within, whatever playground within which you want to answer that question, you will answer it in a certain way, right? What is the meaning of, let's say, power? The word power. If you're standing within the playground of physics, it has a particular meaning, valence. If you're standing in a diplomatic dialogue, it has a particular meaning and a valence. I think mystery is no different.
Lorenzo?
What?
What do you want? You again.
Look. Come on. I don't know what these people. Look at this.
You don't know what? You don't know what these people are
No, it's
talking
very
about?
simple. Very simple. I think
Wake up.
my main. I raise my hands because I have confidence in the people who do the biological evolutionary research, and if they tell me that, well, I see no reason why I should say not. If you tell me without divine intervention or with divine intervention, I'd worry why even bringing up divine intervention to begin with, because that doesn't belong to the logos of biology, the reason, the world of reason, the biological reason. So I have no problem with that. My problem is that this whole God thing, this whole God question, it's turned immediately after, it's turned into an intellectual, a conceptual problem. And to me, the God issue is a question of experience. That is to say, by experience, I mean, it responds to, it coincides, it addresses the desires that I have that sustain my life, that sustain the meaningfulness I find in life. I think there is we all have an impact with reality, with this, with when we look at the experiments, etc. And that sends us into a world of exploration. What is behind this? What has happened? Why is this here, etc. The great danger is to turn those into intellectual issues. And instead, one should keep trying to understand what is happening, in your experience. And that, to me, that opens up to mystery. And it is what we call God, what we call mystery, is an attempt to make of your experiences something reasonable, something worthwhile, something that will sustain you, that will make you get up in the morning, that will give you interest in whatever. The reality that we call God is the fulfillment of those desires.
Would it be fair?
Religion.
Yes. Would it be fair to say that in other words, the two halves of our title of this discussion, faith and science, if we could borrow a word from science, that is evidence, are you saying in a sense that faith and your experience with faith and what it does for you is evidence, in effect, of, for you, God?
Well, evidence to me is an undeniable, inexorable presence of something you are not manufacturing. It's just there. It is the awareness that a fact, something is there. That's not far from what I see faith like. I see religion, faith. For me, the distinction, and I haven't checked it in the dictionary, is faith is born in a ground of religion. But to me, religion is another name for as expansive a reasoning as possible. That is to say, an attempt by reason, an attempt to make sense, to understand what is happening, how it relates to your experience of life. Science is an endeavor of reason because it attempts to understand this life, reality, etc. But it is not the only one, and its scope is very defined, and that is, its greatness lies in how well it can define its limits. But I don't believe it's the only show of what reason is. Reason includes more, reasonableness, if you wish. And at the end of that reasonableness, faith is born there, and it sinks its roots there, and it emerges when something enters your range of experience that cannot be explained in any other way, but that it points directly to this mystery.
Well, Paul, what would be your gloss on what Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete has just said?
I don't find that much to disagree with. I mean, I think that there's a huge tension between religion and science when religion makes factual claims about the universe that are sort of verifiable, because then it runs the risk of being false, and there's a tension between them. But if you characterize faith as a certain feeling one has, in fact, it's many people have that feeling as a powerful feeling. On the other hand, when you make the step from saying, I have that feeling, to therefore it must be true, that seems illegitimate for sort of standard reasons. We know full well people have had all sorts of feelings. People very sincerely believe that gods were responsible for causing lightning and thunder. They believed it sincerely, powerfully, with a felt view, and it's just mistaken.
And in your studies as a psychologist at Yale, is there any aspect of what you've seen, are you saying that every aspect of what you've seen as religious experience or religious feelings can be, I don't know, shall I use the word, explained away by psychological constructs and framing? Well,
actually, I want to be careful here again. I'm very interested in the nature of religious belief and religious practice and its emergence in young children. But I don't do research about how the universe was created, or whether or not God does miracles, or what happens after you die. And so, for instance, I'm very interested in people's belief in life after death. But although I have my own views on this matter, none of my research says that maybe it speaks to the question of whether or not we ascend to heaven or descend to hell. They're entirely compatible. And in fact, some scholars who study the cognitive science and the neuroscience of religion are themselves deeply religious. There's no tension between believing in God or being an atheist, and studying the beliefs and why we have it and how we have it. Even if God exists, and even if all of the religious claims are true, still the psychological question is going to remain. How is it expressed in the brain? How does it emerge in children? How did it evolve?
Even if God exists, but you say it's not a matter of faith with you that he, she, or it doesn't.
Well, my own claim about atheism versus agnosticism, there's a weird political correctness when it comes to religion. If I was to ask you, do you think Hitler is alive and well in New York? You'd say, that's stupid. No. You say, are you agnostic about it? Well, you say, no, it's a stupid claim. What about Jewish conspiracy to rule the world, Thor creating lightning, mental illness caused by demonic possession? You tell me, dumb, silly. No, I don't believe those. You wouldn't say you're agnostic. But the idea is that if something is a religious claim from one of the major religions, it's very impolite to say, well, there's no evidence for it, so I don't believe it. Rather, you're supposed to say, oh, I don't know.
I want to say.
I like to be polite, but the word isn't political correctness, it's more of affirmative action. Where every other belief you get to argue and debate, and if you don't have evidence for it,
I just want to, can I have to interrupt?
Go ahead.
if there is no evidence, I think you have the moral obligation to reject that belief. I say this to you as 100% Catholic, okay? I cannot, it would be unthinkable. The question is, what is the evidence? I remember, what are you willing to consider satisfactory evidence, you see? Depending on the type of claim. I have somebody that a young man was talking with me in a cemetery of all places, and says, I have a problem. I no longer believe, or I don't think I believe in the resurrection of Christ. And I said, well, neither do 54 billion people in the world. And then he said, no, but he is a teacher in the Catholic schools there, which presents a little problem. In any case, he said to me, I don't understand it. Neither do I, but let me help you out. I said, it means that Christ was dead, and then somehow he ceased being dead. He overcame that condition. And I said, do you want me to explain further? Dead? It shouldn't be difficult. Take a look around. I mean, I went, these people were once like, now they're like the Monty Python parrot, So anyway, there's no reaction. They're not interested in anything, Right, you got that part? Fine, okay. And the second part, I don't know. I was out of town. I have no idea. But it is said that he overcame this condition. And that's about all I know. Suddenly he would... and I expected that he would laugh, but he didn't. There were tears in his eyes. And he said, Father, if I believe that, everything would be different. That cloud, that tree, that McDonald's, that bus going by, even those graves, they wouldn't say the same thing to me as they say now, if I believe that. But, and here was a gorgeous, beautiful question, where is the evidence that this happened? I think the nobility and greatness of the human spirit showed itself there. Where is the evidence? So, to me, my question to him is, what evidence would you accept? And it is like this in each point. If I cannot find an evidence I can defend as reasonable to ask for, I don't see why to believe would be an act of irresponsibility.
Interesting audience. I can't wait for the questions. Hands went up on no divine intervention, and an applause for this.
Okay, so I want to return to this question about atheism versus agnosticism and political correctness or whatever in this regard. I think there's a big difference between saying I'm an atheist and saying I'm an atheist and I think anybody who believes otherwise is silly and stupid.
Oh, sure.
Right? And so you don't so you don't have to be an agnostic just to be politically correct, as long as you aren't somebody who says, I believe that everyone who believes in God is silly and stupid. So, and that's not your position, right? It is the position of somebody like Christopher Hitchens, but it's not your position.
It's not my position.
So we don't have to worry about the political correctness. So I'm not insisting that you call yourself an agnostic out of political correctness, because you're at least being polite about your atheism. You're not going to call me an idiot because I'm a believer, right? So we got no problem there, right? So
you view atheist as in some way a term of insult, as it's often used?
No, absolutely not. It's just a belief system, just like theism is. It's just a different belief system. Now, let's talk about evidence. Okay, there is a philosopher named Antony Flew, who styles himself as the world's most famous atheist. He has written a book, and the title of the book is There Is No God, and the no is crossed out. And the subtitle of the book is The World's Most Famous Atheist Finds God. Now, I thought, well, finding God didn't do anything for his humility, but so why has this philosopher, who throughout his entire adult life has held to atheism, in his old age changed to not theism but deism? Okay, he didn't go the whole way. So for those of you who don't know the difference in this technicality, so just like in physics, in theology we have these jargon terms. So a deist is somebody who believes that there's a God who created the universe but doesn't really have anything to do with it. Whereas a theist is somebody who believes in the more orthodox view of God. Now that's probably too simplistic a separation between those two terms, but I'll stick with it for the moment. So anyway, so he's become a deist where he used to be an atheist. Why? Because of the evidence. That's what his book says. Because of the evidence that he looks at the world and he listens to what his physicist friends tell him, and he sees that the world, the universe as a whole, looks like, as Fred Hoyle, another famous atheist, said, it looks like a put-up job. You look at things and you say, it looks like things have been crafted so that we and, well, basically the rocks and the trees and everything else could exist, because there's no reason why the universe should have been put together in such a way that we would end up being here, or that really anything other than rarefied gas or relatively uninteresting stuff should have ever come into being. And looking at that, Anthony Flew said, well, golly, there must be a reason behind that. And the most reasonable answer that I can give to that is that somebody, some intelligence created it. Now, I actually disagree with his conclusions. I don't believe that that is sufficient reason for believing in God. It's certainly not the reason that I believe in God. But I just want to point out that based on evidence, a guy who had a lifelong history of atheism decided he had to believe in God because of the evidence.
At this point, I'd like to turn to the convert to Catholicism on our panel, Nina Azari. You decided as an adult that you would become a Roman Catholic. You were raised as a Unitarian Universalist Unitarian. You've told me that in your family on Friday evenings you started to read from all the religions as you were raised by your Unitarian parents. And you converted and decided Catholicism was, I presume you decided Catholicism was right. It wasn't going to be just I guess I'll do this rather than anything else. Don't want to presume about that. Evidence have anything to do with it?
Yeah, I think it's experiential evidence.
Experiential evidence.
Right. That, in a way, I have to say, I didn't choose it. That's not the way it felt.
It chose something. It chose you.
That's about all I can say about it.
As if maybe there had been a battle, but whatever it was over, and this was now the case.
Well, no. I mean, it's not like I came out of the washing machine, No, I mean, I don't.
Experiential is a key word here.
It just, I needed to do that.
Could we ask, I know you're still in the midst of your ongoing research about what you find in the brain as you look in with the functional magnetic resonance imaging.
Yeah.
Can you give us a bit of a hint? We know it hasn't been peer-reviewed, it hasn't been published yet. Please don't anybody go out and say that she says. Ultimately, but a lot of it is. So what are you finding about, since it's not in the limbic system, and tell us what that was that you expected and why you expected, but in the cognitive areas, what are you finding that your fMRIs are showing you about the experience of the religious feeling?
Thank you for asking that. The other one just... Okay. So the question is, so what? What story have we told? What story will I tell about this description of brain activity? Because we're all storytellers. Scientists are, I think.
Excuse me, scientists are storytellers?
You betcha.
I thought.
If you're not a good storyteller, you're not going to be a good scientist. I'm sorry.
Interesting.
Maybe you disagree, Paul, but I think if you can't spin a good story, if you don't have enough Irish in you or whatever it takes to spin a good story, you're not going to cut it. You just won't.
So what have you seen with the patterns you're finding of the experience inside these heads?
So what we're seeing, again, just briefly, are what we call neocortical areas. This is frontal, part of the frontal cortex. It's just on the outer side wrapping of brain, and a little bit more to the back called parietal cortex. And why do we call those cognitive areas or areas involved in higher thinking? Because in other kinds of studies, when we do experiments asking people maybe to do mathematics or do some rational problem solving, those areas light up. Okay, so we see them also being activated when someone says, yes, I'm in a religious state. Okay. About the limbic system right now is a bit controversial. Who's in and who's out of the limbic system? It's we used to have a really tight definition of the limbic system, but it's been a bit of a controversy. But let's stick to the old story. And limbic system is what we believe is evolutionarily early. That meaning that we think that it's involved in more so-called primitive sorts of behavioral responses, and lots of other animals. We have something in common with them involving limbic activation, whereas these neocortical areas are evolutionarily late. And in some regards, there's even a temptation to say there are parts of it that might be quintessential human, that there aren't other species that have those parts of brain. Okay. Well, why limbic system in this discussion of religious states or religious experience? Before we did our studies using PET scanning, which is brain scanning to study religious states, there was a story out on the horizon, on the radar screen, that drawn from studies of patient populations, particularly patients who have temporal lobe epilepsy. Temporal lobe on the medial aspect toward your nose of the brain is part of the limbic system. So the story was, and it still has a loud voice in some quarters, although it's dying down. Some of these patients, less than 1%, report having intense religious experiences, have symptomatology is they feel they're chosen, they're speaking to God. Okay, so, and there's something gone wrong in the temporal lobe, which is part of the limbic system in these patients. So the story that has been woven is that the God spot of the brain is the limbic system, these deep structures in the brain. Well, and that the limbic marker hypothesis goes like this: no limbic activity, no religious experience, that kind of tight connection. Okay, so the story was the limbic system should be the thing happening when we look in the brain when people report being in a religious state. Well, our data showed no activity, no changed activity in limbic structures. So was I surprised? I was surprised only for about an eye blink. I was surprised because very much as you're Bill, right? Bill, well, there's two of them, you know? It's like New York City. I found these restaurants all over the place, and then I got really confused. The same restaurants. Okay, so as Bill was saying, that, you know, we believe, you know, yeah.
If you missed yesterday at 5 o'clock, you can see it again on the internet. Go ahead, sorry.
So anyway, I mean, much as he said, you know, there's this kind of honor code. We believe our stories that we weave as a group of scientists until and unless something, you know, it's like, well, we don't believe that anymore, right? Because we saw something else. So to that extent, I was a little amazed. It's like, here we have a religious experience. Here we're looking at brain activity. We don't see any limbic activation. But as I say, it only lasted for an eye blink because, well, I was stupid enough to go and get a second PhD and a second master's to study something about religious and theological studies, which have been going on way, way, way before we ever had a playground called what we called science. And there's been a lot of discussion on the character and structure and reflection on what constitutes religious experience. What is it for somebody? And putting that into my storytelling about what we saw with brain, I was like, oh, sure. Why should we expect to see brain areas that are involved in reflex responses with little thought or belief involved? Oops, can't help it. Why should we expect that? And our subjects didn't describe that as the nature of their experience. Why should we expect that?
But rather in the cortex where there's reasoning and human...
Where rational reflection and belief plays a central role in the very structure of the experience.
Monsignor Lorenzo,
Yes.
you've been taking notes.
I'm just like overwhelmed.
Thought you were bored.
Look at this. You know, I don't start out, I think we're just really complicating the issue. Okay? I don't start out by being a very religious. I don't know how many religious experiences I had so that she could take a picture of me or of my brain. I was thinking about other things. You just want to make sense of every day. I mean, the most fundamental fact is that I can give to you a date before which I did not exist. And rapidly approaching is a date which I think, after which perhaps I will not exist. So my first and fundamental question is, what's going on? You know, I think that's a valid question. I wish I didn't question. I don't know, maybe every reality questions it. Maybe dogs and cats are consumed by this problem. You know, they don't seem to be.
They don't seem to be.
No, I watch a lot of the Discovery channels and the animal things, and they have no evidence of wondering what the heck's going on. Okay.
But we don't know for sure.
No, I don't know anything, but I asked the question, and I don't see an answer anywhere. In fact, nothing seems to answer it. But the question won't go away. Then I notice that there are certain desires that are inconsistent. I should settle down for what I have, and yet, for example, I want people I love not to die. I want friendships that are not betrayed. I want justice. I want I don't want to be lied to. You know, there are desires that seem to make no sense, that appear, in fact, to be irrational.
And have questions
Now he tells me that these are, you know, that accidentally I've evolved these things. Well, it's true that they don't, you know, these desires don't make me reproduce, but what do you know? Anyway. There is, I admit, a certain uselessness to this in terms of the fact that nothing in the world seems to correspond or answer these desires. Okay, my point, I think all that I ask of myself, and I think it's reasonable to ask of everybody else, is to be faithful to that experience, to that, and explore the implications of this. And if something is found that explains it, so that the question disappears, then fine, that's the end, and that's that. You understand what I mean? Because otherwise, you just gotta go crazy. You can't even have pizzas or anything like that.
Dr. Bloom?
Again, I mean, the problem is I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. So there's something, either I'm not an atheist or you're not a theist, or we're
But you know something? I am very happy this is happening. It always happens.
I think I'm losing this one.
No. Never mind.
But I mean,
because you see, you are being okay. Go on. No, I'm sorry. I'll shut up.
No. there's all sorts of things in the world and in our minds that exist that are, I think, very amenable to a scientific worldview. Our love of mystery is, I actually think mystery is a core part of the scientific motivation. I actually think it's better satisfied by what we call science than what we call religion. I think scientific accounts of the origin of life and the universe are often dazzling in a way that, say, biblical accounts are not.
You mean because they also bring always new questions and
because
increase
they're richer, they are things, they are often aesthetically gratifying and glorious in every sense. And the list you gave was a wonderful list of not wanting our loved ones to die, wanting justice, and so on. And I think that those are real. I know there are some who deny them, but I think that they are real. I think they have a reality both in the world and in our brains, and I think that they're amenable to evolutionary answers. I think some of the things you listed, actually we have evolved. I think a sense of justice and fairness and morality is a biological adaptation, and I know you had another panel on that topic, and it's a fascinating issue. Others seem to be pretty clearly accidental, and for the most part, we just don't know. They're just mysteries, in a good sense, in which case, so we go and we study them more.
So to what is sometimes described as the ultimate question, which some people say science can't even come near, which is how amazing it is that anything exists at all. I see a smile from the Nobelist here. How amazing it is that...
Ask the guy for the Nobel Prize in Physics.
That anything exists at all is something that, Paul, you're comfortable with as, yes, that's a big mystery, and none of your work has made that one disappear.
Oh God, no.
What did you say?
So to speak. I knew he would wear me down. I think I could give you now, and I think anybody on the panel can, a dozen questions for which we have no idea. Not just my work, not just psychology, but science. We have no idea. And that's because the universe is very puzzling and confusing and difficult. And so there's all sorts of questions we used to have no idea about that now actually we can come close to answering. And that's kind of cool. And that makes some of us sort of optimists, saying, yes, there's all these questions you're asking now, which are, no, but we had those questions before and we came to answer them. Questions, say, about the nature of life and cells and the smallest particles of objects, and we're learning a lot more. Maybe one day, maybe when we have this panel 500 years from now, we'll make some progress.
Quick question before we go to Dr. Phillips here. Is your view of religion and of any ideas of God that can come up one that you think is basically what's called the God of the gaps? Anything we don't know and can't describe scientifically, that's where people put God, and we're just going to keep filling the gaps?
I think that's a respectable view many people have. I think it's psychologically mistaken. I think many Americans, for instance, who believe in creation, a hardcore creationist view, that God created us in our current form, as is, no evolution, it's all a fraud, it happened in a few thousand years and so on, of which a considerable proportion of Americans believe, don't do this because they think that science has failed to answer it. They don't do it because there's a gap in scientific explanation. It's rather they do it for other reasons. They find it natural. They find evolutionary views morally and politically suspect because they ally themselves to people who have those beliefs. So from psychology, even if we were to explain everything, still, I think religion would persist and people would still believe in God.